Hey, Benji.
Hey Pascal, how you doing?
Not too bad, not too bad. Do a headache. Apart from that, pretty good.
Yeah, I got a bit of a cold.
Did you catch a cold on the event, you think?
Yeah, I think I might have caught it like earlier that day, or the day before. Because I seemed fine on the day, but yeah, it's like very next morning. It's like, oh,
That's bad. It's last time
Hey,
to get sick.
hmm.
going on?
Pascal, you're not in the agenda. You have to add yourself.
I did.
Hey, maybe I didn't
I
see
did.
your pull request.
Who was in London the other day? It seemed like a good meetup. Saw a lot of social media posts.
Yeah, we were in London.
Nice.
Stellate guys were in London, so it was a really good one.
Nice.
And if you guys have one, send them over. We are always looking for new people, new speakers there. So the next one is in June, right, Benji?
That's right. Yeah, on the July 2nd.
Okay. We have a few folks out in London. Maybe we can,
Yeah.
or at least in England, we should twist their arms a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Send them along anyway, right?
Yeah, we also, so what we also do there is now we record the videos in relative high quality, and then we post them as separate talks also on Twitter over the GraphQL Foundation account. So it's also a good distribution of the talks afterwards. So we will reuse them to drive then more traffic to the foundation.
Yeah. If you have people that want to do public speaking but don't want to go to London and prefer to come to Switzerland, we also have a work
Yeah, Zurich.
Zurich user group here.
Are
User
you
group
paying
here.
for lodging and transport? I would like to go to Switzerland.
No, but we will accept you. Open, it's open ups, and we pay for the
Usually-
beer afterwards.
Yeah, and there's usually there's a speaker lunch before, so that's what we can offer. We can offer a pizza.
No, but yeah, come.
I'll add it to the next budget subcommittee agenda. All expenses paid, transatlantic flights, and pizza, of course.
Amazing. Are there is someone from the guild coming? I posted it
I
into
think
the Slack channel.
Camille is on holiday.
Okay.
At least he wrote that
Okay.
some days back. But
Yeah, it looks like we might all be here.
Okay.
Yeah. Pascal, you're not on the agenda, so maybe you added yourself to a different one.
oh no,
See?
I know what I did. I know
I
what I
told you.
did. No, I did add myself to the agenda, but I didn't make a pull request. So there should be a branch somewhere.
It's just Martin
What?
that we're waiting for, I think.
Yes.
Martin actually is feeling ill. I'm not sure he'll be able to make
Okay.
it. He was saying he may need to bail. So I think it
Yeah.
enough apology here. So.
Don't worry. I already talked to Martin about what we should or what we talk about. So he's up to date.
Okay, well, I'll get us started then. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the May Composite Schemas Working Group. By being here, we have all agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct. links to all of which are in the agenda if you need a refresher. Let's start off by introducing ourselves. We'll go through in the order that we are in the agenda. So I'll start. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji from Graphar.
Hey everyone, I'm Michael from Chili Cream.
Hey, Shane from Apollo.
I'm Simon from Apollo.
Jeff from Apollo.
And Derek from Apollo.
Pascal from Chili Cream.
Lovely, thank you all. I am happy to help take the notes today. If there's anyone else who can contribute as well, that would be much appreciated, especially if I find myself talking at any point. It's hard to take notes and talk at the same time.
Got you covered.
Awesome, thanks, Jeff. So, reviewing the agenda, we have 3 main topics today, it looks like. Overview the current work, review path syntax, and review lookup. Is there anything else that anyone feels needs to be on the agenda for today? No, generally not. Okay, fantastic. So if we can do a relatively quick summary of the previous meetings, I'll hand over to Michael for that, unless anyone particularly wants to do it.
Okay, so I've made a little list of what we are currently working on, and that's basically what we did in the last 3-4 meetings, and the things that we at the moment are researching, exploring, writing specs on, stuff like that. So the main 2 things, actually, what it boils down to is lookup and the path syntax. To explain a bit how this is tied to each other, and how this spreads out into several subtasks. So first, the lookup is the way we're gonna resolve entities and also entity patches from downstream services or source schemas if we are in the more abstract GraphQL terminology. And there are several things that we learned, I would say, ourselves by applying these concepts a bit and looking around them and reflecting on all the other approaches like what stitching, federation, or fusion, how they deal with that and what they're actually doing. So I will walk through the specifics with lookup after Pascal, but just that is one of the key concepts that we are building into this specification. And there are several working issues with that at the moment. Then we explored, or that was one of the branches that came out of there, is access modifiers. And access modifiers is basically classification of GraphQL fields. At the moment, we have in the specification 2, which is internal and external. So when data is only available through a certain path, it's marked as external to help the query planner. But there's also data that is internal, that is there basically, known to the gateway, but is not accessible from the outside, through the public schema. But when we talked about lookup and patch lookups and actual lookups that can verify that a certain entity is really belonging to an actual entity, then we also talked more about, do we need more access modifiers, maybe to specify all the nuances. And on that, I'm at the moment working on a broader RFC document that explores all these kind of nuances, I would say. The is required that I have here is so is and require directives are two directives that use something that we call the pass syntax. Pascal will talk more about that, but the syntax that we are exploring there is basically how we point between two different type system members and basically tell the engine that they are semantically equivalent, and that allows for mapping or reusage of data and things like that. Also ties finally into lookup. Lastly, and that's again ties also into is and also into provides, are the two scalars that we are exploring, not the final names, but field selection, that is the pass syntax, and field selection set that we are specifying. Apart from that, there's the batching specification that is largely on my lab. I implemented like a prototype. I'm still having to do two more things. I want to have Apollo's multipart subscription format merged in, so I can also see if that works together in this batching. So you batch a query and, for instance, the subscription, all the variations that we tried out. If all of this will be part of the final specification, we don't know. But we wanted to try it out, try all the crazy things out you could do with these batching mechanisms, just to see where the usefulness stops, but the possibilities work out. So this, I made a lot of progress last week. I think probably next week I will hand in a specification document to the GraphQL over HTTP back working group, or the repository, and then we can talk there more about that. Lookup, also Derek had a lot of comments. I answered them mostly, I think, and yeah, there on the PR we don't have that much issues anymore. The main issues that we at the moment have is between these patch and lookup resolvers, but we can talk after Pascal about that. And with that, has anybody questions regarding the work we are doing at the moment?
So
yeah, go ahead.
Pascal raised a question / issue, issue number 34, discuss the effect when you start combining lookup with some of these access modifiers, and there's discussion about that, but the one question I had in particular about lookup, and just it's because I don't think I saw it defined in the directive or in the specification. Would we allow lookup in two different subgraphs with the exact same definition, exact same key argument selection sets, return type, everything is exactly the same? So it's like effectively a shareable field.
In two different source schemas, right?
Two different source subgraphs. Yeah, we could, in theory, allow that. That would, and you can, the query planner can just choose. But do we? Then there's other issues that causes.
I would allow that. Yeah. I would allow that because you want to use overlapping data. I mean, you have shareability for that, and if you want to have that, we would want to allow that because it would allow to optimize data fetching routes if both subgraphs really own the data and can provide the data. Why not?
Yep.
I mean, that would be from the user side that builds it like this. It would provide a way to optimize. Right?
Yeah. I guess the one thing that could make things easier, just playing devil's advocate, of course, like it's going to probably require the same key. Like there's probably going to be a lot of entity types, which are the key is just ID, and your return type is the entity type, right? So you're selecting that. So the questioning is like the root name field, right? The field name of the entry type. Like, do we want to just force people to call it different things across different subgraphs? So it's very clear, like, which subgraph you're going to, right? And if you do that, then it kind of solves the concerns that Pascal raised in like some of the other issues. I agree with you. It makes it easier if we just allow it and let the query planner figure it out and have logic. But I'm just trying to play devil's advocate in the issues you raised.
It doesn't
I don't
fix
think
that.
it's about.
It would
Yeah.
also not fix that. It would
It's
not
not
fix
about.
that.
It's not about routing. It's about identity, right? Because
Let's talk first about lookup before we take on the path syntax, right, Pascal?
Yeah, I think
we can do
that makes
that.
sense. Yeah,
Either one.
I think we should
okay.
come back
Yeah.
to that when it's that part of the agenda. So excellent summary there, Michael. Sounds like a lot of work has been going on. Moving us on to the reviewing of the action items, there is only one. It's a task to everyone: review existing and submit additional test cases. Is this still a relevant action item that we should keep open, or has that been?
Yeah,
actioned
let's keep that open. Shane has actually done that. I haven't merged it yet. I will do that this week. I just was busy with other things, but we're gonna merge that. But there still could be other. Let's keep that open for a couple of weeks more. Maybe
Okay,
2 or 3.
perfect. So we've got 3 topics that we're meant to be discussing: overview the current work, review the path syntax, and review the lookup. Do you think it would make sense to go back to this lookup topic now, Michael?
Yeah, we are anyway in it. It's a broader topic than we expected in the beginning. But let me maybe get people on the problem that we have. Well, not the problem, actually, what we discovered when we talk about these things, what a lookup is. And this was, I think, nobody really thought about that. Like even Martin had also to reflect on what it is. And let me introduce you a bit to the topic. So let's say this is a GraphQL document. It's always good. That's actually how we started understanding this problem. Okay, so let's say we have 2 subgraphs. Subgraph A, there we have a type query, like on most GraphQL servers, on every GraphQL server. And this has maybe a simple field person, which has here an ID that can be passed in typical relay schema or whatever, but it's not about the key, right? But let's say this is our subgraph 1. We have also our person here, and this person has actually here a key directive, and this would be a sufficient declared subgraph for us, just that I don't have to look up yet. Okay, let's duplicate that quickly, and then we can. And this maybe has the address.
Yep.
Okay, looks awesome. Yeah. So what we discovered, just to get everybody on board, is that 2 lookups are not necessarily the same. And maybe we need 2 directives there. We first thought it's a visibility or collision problem, but actually it's not. So let's say this resolver here, this person resolver actually owns the data. So I could go to this graph with an ID, like let's say it's ID 1, and then it would tell me that this ID 1 exists or not. So I can give you for ID 1 a person. The second subgraph actually doesn't know if a person exists, but it might have, let's make it nullable in this case, but it might have an address. So if you give, for instance, the ID 1 into it, it might have an address to ID 1. This is basically a patch lookup. So this can patch data into other into data from other subgraphs. So these two lookups actually are fundamentally different. In Apollo system, in Apollo Federation, we have this difference also. There is this underscore entities field, which just does patching. And then you have like explicitly publicly declared fields that are the former one. So we have actually lookups and we have patchers. We haven't agreed on this naming. We are still completely exploring the area here. It's just to get you all on board of the problem, and that's also why it actually doesn't matter if this is person 1, and we would say it's lookup, but it's internal or private, whatever, because this is semantically, these two things are semantically different. And there could be very well a subgraph C, just to make it more confusing, that maybe has some other information. And this guy is can also verify if a person exists. There could be two subgraphs that both can verify that this key has an entity, but there are subgraphs that cannot do the same thing. They are just patches. Typical example here is if you want to bring relations in. This address field maybe doesn't make sense, but let's say this is a review service. And actually our persons are kind of users that write reviews somewhere. And then we are actually not wanting to bring here a scalar in, but we know the relation to another object. That's a typical example, right? And you could tell what the reviews that the user wrote a review. So if you get a user ID, you can pull up the reviews, the list of reviews, and then merge that into the user type, and that's that's the essential issue. And there are several ways to solve that, and that's what we are at the moment exploring. Like this is one. This is more a technical thing to resolve that with an internal, but it's actually not telling the user semantics of what is different between these lookups. It just says this one is not visible. And this should then tell the gateway, the query planner, that you cannot directly go to this. Because the thing here is, if you write a query, and the query is something like reviews, right? We write this query. If we went directly to reviews to just resolve that, and we could that, right? Reviews covers all the data for this query. Then the reviews subgraph might tell us for every single ID that we pass in that there is a person. And this person might have reviews or might not have reviews. But because it cannot tell you if the user exists, it can just tell you that there are reviews for this user. And that's why to get that right, we actually have to go to A or C to verify that the user is there. And then we can patch in reviews.
Yeah, I see what you're saying now. And I think maybe a better way to make this even more clear is the person argument for ID, just change the string to like foobar. Right? It's like a non-existent ID, right? It doesn't actually exist. If we just called reviews in this case, then we would like return the person object technically and just say, oh, sure, that person maybe exists and here are the reviews, but we didn't verify that the ID foobar is actually a real ID. Like, and that's what we want to do first. Like, you'd ideally want to return an error, like, sorry, that's not a real ID first, rather than just null reviews.
Yeah, exactly. You basically, the query planner needs to know that this is actually something to look this thing up.
Yep.
And this one is the one to patch things in. So if
Yep.
we looked it up, then we can use this one to patch it in. And with these come a couple of differences from visibility, right? If let's use patch here as a word. I know Martin is not a fan of patch, but we agree on the functionality itself.
I kind of like what Benji just proposed. Maybe add, instead of a lookup, maybe add extension or something. Like I kind of I think it's better than patch, but yeah.
Yeah, but
It's the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. We haven't found the term for it. But that's actually it, right? You force to first verify that the object exists, and then you can patch it. And this one has a semantic then. If you put this on, this automatically will not be exposed. So this becomes internal.
Yep.
Yeah, because it started off from like the very simple case. So sometimes those are like root queries, some that you want to expose publicly, and sometimes you want to hide it, right? But that was a good distinction between the having like actual like a source of truth versus somewhere down the line in the query path we gotta add extra information to it. So it's kind of like it's a good good conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, it was last week. It took the whole group, I would say, at least half an hour to figure out what the problem is. So yeah, but now we kind of want to find the right wording here. So all suggestions are up. I write the document with a couple of also site explorations around that, also more edge cases. So we have a really good feeling to move forward with lookup. And that's for lookup. Any other
Thanks.
question?
That's a really great explanation. Like the fact that it took you guys like half an hour to figure this out, and then you've managed to present it in such a way that I now understand it is great. So I suggested extension in the chat, and the primary reason for this is I'm thinking, what would the equivalent of this be in traditional SDL when you're just dealing with one schema? And really in that situation, you would be extend type person and give it the reviews field, right? So this is like an entry point to be able to do the equivalent of extend type. So I think putting extends would be a bit weird because that's probably more to do with interfaces. So I thought extension might be the right word. But yeah, that's just to share my reasoning of how I came up with that term.
Yeah, and it kind of, if you think about like extends, is really about the interface of the type. But in this case, this is a valid type. This is a full qualified type in this GraphQL schema. But this resolver kind of is described as produces extension data in the sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you wanted a more precise name, extension lookup would actually be the best name. Because you've got lookup for actually looking up a record, and then you've got extension lookup for doing, again, a lookup, but only in order to extend it. But I think it's perhaps a little verbose, and I would just go with extension.
I will propose in the RFC document that I'm working on. I will propose a couple of these, and I will also add this.
Because one of the confusions was also like if you have a lookup, right, and then you have to add that internal modifier, it kind of gets confusing to users how you actually hide fields from it versus not. Because this is like, or whether this is like, is public or is like is private. It gets confusing pretty fast, right? So like you say something it's internal, it means it's internal, it's inaccessible, right? There's a very strong saying why it's internal, right? But sometimes it is, sometimes not. It's a kind of getting combination of two different directives to do that. It's very, very confusing. So
Yeah,
it's
it's not
solved
only
that.
confusing, but it's also ambiguous. So if you mark it as lookup and internal, does that mean it's definitely not a source of truth for this? Like, can you not trust it and you have to find it somewhere else? And if like the whole concept of a person model was entirely internal, you would still potentially need to look it up so that you could use it as an input to other things. So yeah, I think you definitely need a different concept for that.
Yeah, and the general, the broader idea about lookup that we have, if that these kind of lookups, they are all like that end up in the public schema, they are also like valuable knowledge to a client, because you're describing basically whatever arguments I have here. These are keys, and these are keys on the person type, and could also be reused by client if that kind of metadata is exposed here.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different user story, also not the right working group, but it's the wider discussions we had with Martin, where Apollo is also interested.
Yep. And then this actually answers and solves my question I brought up too early before then, because if we have things that are just marked as a lookup, then I think it makes sense they could be the same name across different subgraphs, because they're doing the true lookup, right? And then because it only became an issue when you had to introduce at internal, and then if the function of internal is like, well, I hide everything, also called this across all subgraphs, that's a separate internal discussion. But now that problem goes away. If it's you don't tag it with internal, it's just very clearly an extension, then it's not a problem.
Yeah, and once we have settled on this guy here, I think it will be also very clean from the schema. This becomes very clean schemas.
I would explore also different concepts, because it's just the naming of the lookup directive. I think we have completely ditched the concept of like ownership. Last meeting we had a quick discussion about it, and it didn't make sense. But one thing that we can experiment with is that theoretically you could also flag the ID, the argument, as something which is very specific.
That's why you have ownership here.
Yeah, but we don't specify type as owned by one subgraph and such things. I think, I think
you shouldn't, because you're not.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying that we should not only look for better directives, for better names for patch, but we should also experiment a bit with maybe there is another concept that just fits the problem better, right? Maybe.
So just to repeat and understand, you're saying maybe lookup could also be changed, then the name of lookup?
No, maybe it's not the place where you want to signal this. One place where you could signal that this resolver, this lookup that you have, is a lookup which can resolve any person ID. It's an existence operation. You could signal that in different places as well. For example, you could say on the argument, you could say that this person ID, this ID is actually the ID of the entity, and it can be resolved. Or you can say that the type can be resolved through this lookup, but things like this.
The way we thought about that, or I discussed with Martin a bit, is that it's not about ownership of a type, it's ownership of a key. And so it could be that service A can tell you that this entity exists by this key. Maybe also C, but maybe C also has a second way to resolve this thing, because other maybe also a key just to this service. So kind of we have two ownerships here of two different key sets. So it cannot be an ownership of the whole type by one subgraph.
Yeah, it has to be on
but-
the resolver.
But it's like the ownership is in this essence implicitly. So if you have a lookup, you're telling the outside world, I can tell you if person exists if you give me this defined key here.
What would be really interesting is to know, but we only know this after we've done it and we run into the problem. What do you need more? Do you need more public lookups, or do you need more patches? So what do we have to optimize for, right?
It's
anyway,
definitely
you
more
have
patches.
probably more
Maybe-
extensions. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you're often, not most of the time, you're often going to be, doing the source entry point, getting objects that exist, and you're extending every single one of those objects. So you're going to be calling out to a lot of extensions, right? And so that's most of the work with a lot of the query plans that I see with customers. But
Also,
of course,
I would have expected, yeah.
But what we commonly see is the other issue is where someone like, I don't know, and see this in Federation, someone returns an ID like somehow from somewhere else, like someone has a person ID, and for some reason they have it, it's an old state or something, and then you go and try to use that ID and it's like an invalid ID. And of course, this is really just a data problem, is what we tell them. Well, okay, well, you had an invalid ID somewhere. But this is something that comes up a lot with Federation, is that, how do we properly indicate that, like, without having to error out everything, that, sorry, this one entry point was null. I think we have an issue with this today, because, like, if you return, like, because entities can't be or shouldn't be nullable, I think is the issue. So I think I think we can solve this with the syntax. I'm just calling out that we often see this question like, oh, what happens if I return null from entities resolver, reference resolver? Like, what do I do? Like, or how's that handled? Or can the router handle that? Stuff like that.
Yeah, in this case with the lookup, like these are all lookups are explicitly nullable.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that
And
just
that
kind of
means-
solves the problem right
Yeah.
there. It's just like you can choose, oh yeah, I can, I guess it's probably maybe advised that you actually use nullable for lookups, because like, yeah, maybe what if you do somehow get an invalid ID? But I guess you can
Yes.
choose and decide that.
Yes.
There is the concern if you have multiple sources of truth. So if you have multiple lookups for the same thing, each defining potentially different fields, that one of them might not know that a thing has been deleted and might say, yes, this exists. The other one might say, no, it's been deleted and it doesn't exist anymore. And then you have one of them returning null, one of them returning not null, but they are both sources of truth, effectively. They're what they say the query planner believes to be true. So you will need to figure out how to resolve that. Which one wins? I would say null wins generally.
That's one of the fundamentals of like principles of federation. So the entity is the same thing all across. So that is a data consistency problem. And I think we should still say that given the ID, I can resolve the same thing all across. If it's not, man, probably you have a data problem. You should fix that.
Yeah,
Right,
although about nullability, Derek, we in the composition is that null would win, right? If you have this, you say this field is, and that Federation does the same, right?
Yeah.
If this is non-nullable, then it would be nullable because one field is null, and we cannot guarantee non-nullability. But general type structure, I agree. Yes.
Though I agree in principle with what you've said about data consistency, we're talking here about distributed systems. So there will always be windows during which the data is out of sync if you have multiple sources of truth. And in a microservices architecture, you've got multiple sources of truth. Even if you've just got one Postgres instance and you're just querying that, parallel transactions can see different results from the data depending on exactly the timestamp at which they started. So it is still a situation that can crop up, and it's one that cannot necessarily be solved due to, you know, I forget what it is, but the theorem of consistency and the other two.
Yeah, there are several patterns for that, but like depending on what you pick, you have a bigger challenge or a smaller challenge. But yeah, there is like if you use eventual consistency, for instance, then you have maybe two subgraphs that can resolve the entity by a key, but are eventually consistent. So could, depending of what, have different states. There is a bit of an optimization in the query planning, but we are not yet there. That can be done, and where we can also tell implementers to optimize for certain things. So you get things consistent and also have algorithms to steer towards certain subgraphs. But we can, like, this is a bit down the line, I would say. There's also, in general, a thing where we have to say this is out of scope, like because it's also a bit dependent on the user, what kind of microservice architecture they choose.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, this has been an interesting discussion, but I'm aware that time is ticking on. So let's move to the next topic. To give Michael a break, let's, unless it makes sense to do otherwise, let's talk about path syntax with Pascal.
Do it. Let me share my screen.
I'm stopping.
Okay, so just so you know where to look for things, there's this massive document which you have to look at quite quickly. We went through this document before, and there's also this the pull request on the composite schema specification. There's also the appendix with the specification, which is a bit more formal than this RFC. Just to give you a quick rundown on what the problem is. With the is directive and also the requires directive, we have we introduced a new scalar called the field selection, and the field selection is the scalar that's in here. And what this scalar does is it expresses semantic equivalence between a field in the output. So in this case, it would be this field, and a field in the input, which could be an argument or which could be an input object field. Now, the fundamental problem of this is that there's two colliding worlds which GraphQL wasn't designed to be used for. So you have output in here and you want to map into input. In this simple case, this is very easy. If you go more complicated, then things fall apart quite quickly with the approaches that we had in mind. Now, there's first the definition of a lot of cases, and then there is a few approaches how we could solve the problem. We discussed this in length last time, so you can also watch the video of the last session if you want to learn more about it. In general, there's three things that were discussed. One is to have a selection set as the selection, and with the selection set map the input to the output. The other one was having a path syntax, and the third one was something in between, which basically would introduce some mixture between path and syntax and selection set syntax. There's a lot of cases here. You can also go through them and have a look. What we've landed on is that probably the path syntax is actually what we want. And I formalize this a bit in this appendix of the specification within the pull request, where there is an introduction what the problem is, same thing as you just have seen. And then it goes into the language and the language extensions. Have a look quickly. So what the solution is to the problem is we want to match the output to the input. And it could be that the input is a complex type and the output is also complex type. To make things even worse, it could be that the output is a abstract type where we actually can have more than one selection, which is possible, depending on if it's a movie or if it's a book. Good. We had a long discussion, and we said that we want to match the values. And as I was writing the specification, I realized that it makes a lot of sense if we just always specify the value of the argument and have this as some kind of an input object value. And the value of the object value is either another input object value or a path. And in this case, this also, that's actually, yeah, in this case, that's also valid because this is a path which selects the ID. And this is not an input object, it's a scalar. So it actually matches and makes a lot of sense, right? If you look at the language, it's actually quite easy. First, this describes a bit in how GraphQL does it. And then we talk about how we are going to do it. Path is either a name, which is the same as in the GraphQL specification. Then a path is segmented with a dot, and a path can be a more concrete version of an abstract type if necessary. In this case, where you have a more concrete version of an abstract type, a specific one, you might make use of the pipe operator to specify that there's multiple possibilities for this value. A path always specifies one path always points to a single value, but a single value can come from multiple possible types. What I mean with this is, if you have media by ID, it could be that there's a book, and on the book you want to select the title. But media by ID movie could also return a movie, and then you're interested in the movie title, which means that these are two different fields, depending on the return type. And to match this, you can use this generic syntax and then select the different values. This is always one value. There's no possibility to have more than one value, but it could be that the value comes from multiple fields. Exactly. So this is the path, which is basically separated by dots. Each segment is in the context of the parent. So this would select from the root, the book field, and now we are in a book type, so we select the title. There's no arguments allowed in the path, and there's no arguments allowed in the path. Exactly.
There are generics allowed.
There are generics allowed. There is no arguments allowed because there's no need for it. We also do not cover lists because it doesn't make sense. So what we do is we match this value in the graphical sense, in the graphical spec sense, to an output field, and we do this by specifying an input type, an input object, a selected object value, or just path. And then we point basically from an input value from an output value to an input value, or the other way around, depending on how you look at it. It's a bit of a reduced set of literals. So we have selected value, which is basically what the field selection is. This could either be just a path, or it could be an object value. And we have the selected object value, which is just a key value pair of selected values, a list of key value pairs of selected values. Yeah, that's the more or less formal language classification. Now we have to talk about validation. This is all up for review in the repository, so you can have a read and you can see if this makes sense for you and give feedback for it. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so just as initial feedback for this, because this is this kind of query paths is something that I've thought about quite a lot. This currently clashes with the schema coordinates specification. I mean, it's an independent use case, so it's not necessarily a blocking thing. But in GraphQL, we're trying to standardize that A.B means the field B on the type A. And you're using dot as a path traversal here. Also, GraphQL doesn't have generics, and this is very much like a generics inspired syntax, which is a little bit challenging. So I wanted to raise that I have come up with an alternative path syntax, which I proposed like a couple of years ago, called operation expressions. This was really just an exploration of where we could use schema coordinates in other situations, just to try and help feel more confident that schema coordinates were the right thing, which ultimately I think we decided they were. So operation expressions uses like the schema coordinates syntax, but then extends it a little bit. So rather than using dot for path traversal, it uses a greater than symbol. So everything that you've expressed here should be expressible also, other than the object constructs, which could be added. So for example, your media by ID would be media by ID, then traverse, which basically means add a selection set, and then it would be movie title, which would mean the movie title field on a movie type. So effectively create a inline fragment spread on the given type and then put that field reference inside of it.
So your error is when you do generic essentially.
No, it's just for traversal. It's basically just means selection set. So if it
yeah, it's not a real generic that we actually need, but we kind of need something like an inline fragment spread,
which is exactly what
the
operations syntax allows for. So you can do media by ID greater than movie title, and that would just mean query media by ID and then have a selection set on it, and in that selection set query movie title. Or you could do media by ID greater than movie title, which would then be a inline fragment spread. Again, all of this is
so basically replacing everything which is a dot with a greater than, and if you need to specify the concrete type, instead of having a field, you're just using the coordinate.
So I think when we were discussing this, there was basically the idea that this is very similar to like a JSON path, right? So it's actually pretty simple to reason about. And the generic stuff, there was also kind of like some stuff from the programming that's kind of like pretty easy to understand. I'm wondering like whether, this proposed syntax with the arrow, like the media by ID, it's the greater than movie title, if that is actually more, it's simpler to grasp for users, because that's also should be consideration.
Sure.
Yeah, it's definitely worth discussion.
We can add it into the discussion. It's good to have the alternative. We can extend the table and add it in, so we can see a bit.
Yeah. So to summarize what we actually wanted to do to make it explicit, that when you do those selections, right, if it's an object, it always has to be an object. And If it's
Yes.
a scalar, it's a scalar, right? And you always have a mapping between the input, so kind of like an alias to the output, right? For every single field, those kind of like constraints.
Yeah, the thing which is different from our initial thing is that we don't do magic anymore. So it's not allowed to have when you have a user input like this. There you go. Yep. It's not allowed to write first name, last name without specifying the field, the name, the aliases. Because this is really easy to understand now. This is something that doesn't happen so often anyway. It could be that it happens, but I don't think that you will have very complex cases here. The thing that you need the most is probably this. And it's important that this stays simple, I would say, because you often have an argument that you want to map with something. Because
Yep.
where do you have complex inputs? It's you do have them on queries, but you rarely, right? You usually have them on mutations, and mutations is something that you do not really federate.
Well, you could have a one-off, right? That's coming up. That would be an input type, one-off.
Yeah, we talked about that, Derek. In the sense you need a one-off. So we need a one-off because like think about the case where you have composite types. And you like in Apollo Federation, you would write in the key a fragment spread. In that fragment, we say, okay, the key is this blah blah blah, and if it's a review, it's this, and if it's this, it's that. And for this, we need one-off to project onto.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
so
this problem really breaks down to two things. You need to have a way to express inputs. You need to have a way to express outputs. As it's graphical, these two things are different. You now have to choose which one you want to keep in the original form, because you can only keep one in the original form. You could, for example, also define a query, and then you somehow map them into input values, but that's even weirder. What we decided to go on is we have this input object kind of structure and we basically change how we select from the result. Now, this path syntax, I think we should explore the other approaches as well. If we already have experience in the GraphQL ecosystem, we should definitely also get into this. But for the specification, I guess it's pretty simple, right? Because it's basically this part that changes, and maybe some of the validation, but probably not even, because it's just a different way to express this. So I think we can move ahead with the validation on this, and then decide later on what the actual path syntax is.
by the way, Benji, the operation expression syntax, like what we need for the path syntax is also reduced. Like it's, for instance, a schema coordinate. Like the schema coordinate would be too much, but also not enough. Because like the schema coordinate can point to arguments, but we don't want it to point to arguments, right? It should not be allowed to point to arguments. But like there are a lot of constraints around that.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah.
perfectly valid. And to say that it uses only these forms of operation expressions would be perfectly valid.
Yeah. I'm just, yeah. So by the way, one-off, we thought mostly when we thought about one-off, we thought about one-off to project into an input object, a key that has composite types, I haven't thought about one-off in the way that you used it as a finder for different keys, right? In this case, you would need to kind of say this is a finder for two key sets, right? And the way we thought until now about one-offs is if you have a complex key that has fragments inside, then we project it with one-off in an input structure. So this one is something I also, and that's what you also meant, Derek, right? The user finder, what the example.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're gonna have to. I mean, it's simple, but also complex.
Yeah, for sure. And I think
yeah,
this is one
Go
of
ahead.
the patterns that hopefully once one of is like RFC3, we will see more in schemas, because at the moment there's a lot of like accessor fields for getting users by or getting something by many different things, and replacing all of those with a single accessor field I think will help tidy up schemas. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do that internally for your schema composition. It could be like a transform that happens at the final stage. But yeah, I think it is definitely something worth keeping in mind.
Yeah.
And as for the whole input object problem that you're presenting, Pascal, that's super, like, I'm going to have to read up on that quite a bit before I can give any opinion on that. That's really, really complex. Like, I'm sure there'll be some interesting situations where inputs and outputs don't quite match up, and yeah, what there are solutions.
Yeah, I mean, we had some, this generic syntax and also this pipe syntax that is here, is something which is which there is a different approach which I proposed in here, which solves this problem, where we have basically only selection sets. But it's also difficult to understand, because everything that is a value in the input structure in this approach is a selection. And it's a special selection because this selection is only allowed to select one field, right? What I wanted to do. And then you do not have this problem of having to introduce new syntax. It's just the same thing, but this is a lot clunkier than when we just do it with the pipes, right?
Well, I will say that the one of the guiding principles is that what is it? Something rather over brevity. So doing it a little bit clunkier isn't always the worst thing. And if you use the selection set syntax, that's already a thing that we support. Obviously, again, you would need to apply restrictions on it. One of the interesting things there is, I think, accepting arguments, like fixed arguments, may not be the worst thing. It might be that, for example, you need to like name full or like date in this format, or whatever, where you pass a specifier to it to get it in a stable format rather than, for example, a locale based format might actually be something that you want long term. I don't know.
Yeah,
but yeah.
the reason why arguments were not something that we cared about is because it's arguments are not same as scalar values. You could also say that first name is the first name. I hate this. The first name is first name, and the age is 7. But the scalar here, when you say the age is 7, then again, it doesn't really have a semantic meaning to it, right? And with the arguments, it's also difficult when you want to point to a field, I guess, I'm not sure. And then the argument has a value, then what's the semantic meaning of the field? Well, we'll see, I guess. I guess we will be finished, and then we will find out that we actually should have done it differently again.
More investigation required. Okay, well, we are over time. So is there any last thing that needs to be said? No, doesn't seem like it. Fantastic. Well, as always, amazing work, everyone. Pascal, if you can send me links to the relevant things that I've given some feedback on so I can read about them in more depth and maybe give more useful feedback, that would be fantastic. Otherwise, I'll see you all next month or in a few minutes if you're coming to the main working group. Thanks,
See you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye bye. Thanks.